Hello and welcome to this edition of the Pleasantville Garden Club show. My name is Rick Harper. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension here in Westchester County. I'm an extension educator in the horticulture program area, and today we're going to talk a little bit about pest management, past, present, future. We'll talk about integrated pest management and some of the different thoughts I have relative to pest management. Obviously, people have been concerned with managing pests for about as long as we've been growing food, and of course the archaeological findings show that we've been growing our own crops for approximately 10,000 years. Early agriculture has been demonstrated to have been taking place in the Middle East at different settlements, including Katal Hayuk and Jericho. Basically, we were storing seeds and consuming wild grasses. Of course, agriculture today is much different than it was back then. About 80% of the human diet comes from the seeds of less than 12 plants. We produce now several tons of food per acre, far more than we've produced in the past. And about less than 3% of the population here in the U.S. is directly involved in agriculture. But however, the common thread is that pests still cause significant losses to food, fiber, and feed production. In terms of talking a little bit about some of the previous pest management strategies, there are a few different findings. In 1200 BC, the Chinese used botanical insecticides to treat seeds. Homer referred to the use of sulfur in 1100 BC. 950 BC, burning was used as a cultural control. And the Chinese have been doing beneficial insect releases for a number of years. It was first documented in 324 BC that they used ants to control caterpillars and borers in citrus crops. And then, of course, we fast forward several hundred years. We have Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s who recommended the use of beneficial arthropods. In the late 1800s, we began using a number of different chemicals. There was actually the widespread use of Bordeaux mixture, and Paris green began in the French vineyards to combat a number of different pests that they were contending with. And in the late 1800s, here in California, we started to use the Asian ladybird beetle to control cottony cushion scale. So it's another example of a very early beneficial insect release here in the United States. In terms of kind of giving it an integrated spin, in the 1950s there was a couple very important studies that I do want to reference, and that is in 1953 in the orchards of Nova Scotia. Dr. Pickett was actually involved with studying a codling moth elimination program. And what he found was that mite populations exploded because the program relied essentially solely on the use of DDT for the control of pests. And what he found is that beneficial insects were actually being killed off because of this sole strategy of pest management. He suggested a combination of cultural practices to allow natural enemy populations to recover. And then the other study that I wanted to reference is a study from 1959 from the University of California, and they actually coined the term integrated pest control. So we kind of see a little bit here about the history of using an integrated approach relative to pest management, and this study related to the spotted alfalfa aphid. And they recommended using a number of biological, cultural, and chemical controls, kind of, as I said before, an integrated approach, as well as using natural enemies and setting economic thresholds. This is kind of, again, a new term back in the 1950s. We sort of affiliate the old style of pest management as being a bit of a see it and spray it approach, but this study actually reveals a thinking a little bit beyond that, and that is to set certain thresholds or certain tolerance levels before you actually take action. And of course, the environmental awareness movement, I can't talk about pest management without mentioning the 1960s in Silent Spring, which was written obviously by Rachel Carlson. And the basic principle of agriculture is to change the natural system so that more items useful to humans can be produced. But of course the question is, how do we do this sustainably? And obviously that question was posed in Rachel Carlson's book and by a number of people in the 1960s. And this is a great quote that I like to use. We must find ways to lessen the burden on Earth's resources, and we must encourage better stewardship of the planet so that all of us can live in a clean and productive environment. And of course that was by President Jimmy Carter. So you have kind of all of these factors working together, those early studies that I'd referenced and the environmental movement in the 1960s. Those things kind of birthed what we now call integrated pest management. And there are a number of different definitions relative to integrated pest management, and they can change greatly depending on who it is you're talking with and what textbooks you're opening and what websites you're going to. But what I tend to do is I tend to break down each term, and generally I just classify it as defining it as a systematic integrated approach to managing pest populations while minimizing the risks involved with that, the risks socially, environmentally, and economically. And as I said before, I tend to just break down each term if I want to get a little bit more specific. Obviously, integrated involves many strategies that are being used to avoid or solve a pest problem. And pests, of course, well, pests are virtually any unwanted organism that are a nuisance to us or something that we have, such as our domestic animals, and that can cause us injury or compete for our resources. Basically, something that we don't want around us. This is just an example right here, of course, of a trap that is being used to trap carpenter ants. Well, pest is essentially anything that bothers you. This is another example of a pest that we're actually encouraging people to keep an eye out right now. This is a twig of a juniper. Some of you might recognize that. And you'll notice the orange globular structure, and that is the fruiting body of cedar apple rust. And this time of year, of course, it's actually evident. If we have a little bit more rain, we will actually see some of these coming out on some junipers. In fact, in some spots of the county, you might see them on some of your junipers right now, depending on the local environment. But we are encouraging people to keep an eye out. This is another example of a pest. Of course, the alternate host are crab apples. And of course, management. I mentioned that I break down each term. Well, management is the process of making decisions in a systematic way to keep pests from reaching intolerable levels. This is a little bit different than control, sort of the older term that we use, because management kind of connotates and does actually mean that small populations of pests can often be tolerated, and total eradication is often not necessary. However, of course, that's not always the case. This is just an example. I try to mention Asian longhorn beetle whenever I'm in the community because I do want people to be aware of it. This is an example of a pest that's an exotic invader, and we do want to eliminate pests, all Asian longhorn beetle pests. And so our tolerance threshold for this particular pest is virtually zero. It's very, very, very low. So here we see a picture of the adult and the pupa. Here's a picture of the egg and the exit site in the top part of the screen, the very round circle. And that's probably what you're going to notice if you do happen to be keeping an eye out for this particular pest. It is still contained, as far as we know, to basically the New York City area, parts of Long Island, and of course in New Jersey. We so far do not know of it being in Westchester County. So, in terms of breaking down the different steps of IPM, we first want to talk a little bit about preventative measures. IPM practices are used before a pest problem develops to prevent or stall the buildup of pests. And I think that's very important. I've heard people say that integrated pest management connotates being reactive. And that's simply not the case. I think the first and foremost important step relative to integrated pest management does relate to prevention of a pest problem. And I do want to use an example right here relative to our lawns. We get a lot of questions about lawns this time of the year. However, this can relate to any type of plant virtually, because plants require light for photosynthesis, air. They require the carbon dioxide and oxygen in the air for, again, photosynthesis and respiration. They, of course, require water and soil. They require the organic matter and the minerals and the essential elements that are found in soil in order to grow. So given that we know that plants require all of these factors, we understand that plants undergo a number of different stress factors. And so what do we do with turf grass, for example? Well, we walk on it, and sometimes we run on it, and we end up compacting the soil or compacting the site, and we end up with a compaction situation. Well, according to integrated pest management, what will we do in a situation like this? Well, we want to avoid stress, we want to prevent pests, and we want to do this through proper cultural practices that help to maximize plant health. So as evidenced by this picture right here, we sort of want to tip the factors in favor of the environment to prevent the pest. So again, going back to my example, if we're dealing with a lawn that's compacted, which is a very common situation, Obviously, one of the tenets of integrated pest management relative to preventing compaction or even addressing compaction in a non-chemical way would be to core aerify the site. Core aeration is a cultural strategy that we can use. Or we could try to keep people off the grass, and I realize that that's probably easier said than done in certain situations. But this would be an example of preventing a pest situation or using a non-chemical way of actually addressing it. And that's what I'm kind of communicating right here is an underlying philosophy of IPM, and that is that IPM involves the move from a product-based control system, which again, as I mentioned before, sort of the older-fashioned, the see it and spray it strategy, to a practice-based management approach, from a product-based control system to a practice-based management approach, which of course involves understanding a little bit about what plants require, as I talked about earlier, what, for example, turf grass requires, and how to properly act once we understand those different elements in the environment. So we talked about preventing pests. We're going to talk a little bit now about monitoring pests. This is obviously another important tenet of integrated pest management, and this simply involves watching or regularly scouting for the appearance of insects, weeds, diseases, and other pests in our environment around us. So for example, again, we're using the lawn analogy. If we're concerned that we have a grub problem, well, we want to get out there and use perhaps obviously in a golf course setting we might use a cup cutter, but for those of us with residential lawns we simply might use a shovel and simply cut a piece of the turf and pull that back and see if we actually do have a grub problem, if we have some areas of turf that we're concerned with. Again, rather than going and just grabbing an insecticide, we're actually getting out there and employing a practice. This is another example right here. If you have, for example, an ornamental tree or shrub, again, just using the inspection method, simply going and turning over the leaves or the flowers, getting familiar with the plant. For example, right now we're starting to see eastern tent caterpillars emerge. Well, those egg masses can be detected much earlier in the season by doing exactly what we're doing right here. This is a cherry, so going out on a preferred host of eastern tent caterpillar at the right time of the season enables us to detect the pest problem or detect the potential pest before it becomes a problem. So monitoring is obviously a very important tenet of integrated pest management. Now comes the third step, which is actually assessing the damage. This is simply the process of determining the potential for pest populations to reach an economic threshold, or for us, an intolerable level. And what do I mean by us? I mean casual growers. We don't tend to use economic thresholds. We use aesthetic thresholds. So for example, if you have a lawn, how many weeds are you willing to tolerate? If you have a vegetable garden, how many insects are you willing to tolerate? If you have a tree, how many damaged leaves are you willing to tolerate? The level of pest presence that individual homeowners and property owners are willing to tolerate, and we find that it tends to be very low. Now this statistic I have right here, I don't place a ton of faith in different types of statistics, but what it does is it communicates that people tend to tolerate very little pest presence when it comes to their home gardens, their lawns, their vegetable gardens, their trees, their shrubs, things like that. Now we are seeing that change a little bit. I think that people are now willing to tolerate a little bit more in terms of pest populations. And then whenever it comes to actually addressing the pest population, I think people are interested in employing some different strategies. So obviously, as I said before, in terms of thresholds, which lawn would you prefer? Well, I think most of us would probably prefer the lawn in the upper portion of the screen, the lawn that's perfectly green. And there's nothing wrong with preferring a healthy lawn, a lawn that's relatively weed-free. We all know that lawns can benefit the environment tremendously. If you have a thick, lush lawn, it can prevent runoff, prevent erosion. But we do see, for example, with this picture, we do see that there is a sign up there, and so this lawn has obviously been treated with some type of product, whether it's been some type of fertilizers or pesticides or whatnot. So how we go about accomplishing this, of course, is key and can be important. And that really leads us into our fourth step, which is action, which is choosing the appropriate pest management strategy once a threshold has been reached. So again, we have that lawn that we're not willing to tolerate the weed numbers that are on that lawn or the insects in our vegetable garden. What can we do? Well, obviously one of the tenets of integrated pest management is perhaps to try something biologically or biological in nature. This is an example of a lacewing, and this is a naturally occurring insect. It is a predator, and you know, some of us might think, well, where can I go and get lacewings? Well, you certainly can do beneficial insect releases on your property, but another thing is to just simply encourage these populations through selecting your pesticide use or minimizing your pesticide use. So this is an example of biological control, a lacewing. Obviously, we could use something like some type of mechanical control to manage the pest problem. And here we have simply an example where we're pulling out some garlic mustard or using perhaps a string trimmer or a weed eater, as we see on the right portion of the screen. And then, of course, really kind of my springboard for what I wanted to continue talking about, and that is the chemical aspect. And obviously, this is while integrated pest management promotes using a number of different strategies, it does not necessarily preclude the use of chemical products. It does encourage the use of least toxic products that are used really on an as-needed basis. So in terms of my thoughts or my opinions rather for the future of pest management, we talked a little bit about the past in terms of integrated pest management, some of our early pest management situations, some of our early pest management problems. And then we talked about how really integrated pest management was birthed from some of the studies in the 1950s and of course the environmental movement in the 1960s. And then I talked about some of our current definitions that we use for integrated pest management. And I really want to try to kind of answer the question, where are we headed, so to speak, relative to integrated pest management, and what is the future of pest management? Well, I believe firmly, and this is perhaps just my opinion, but I believe that perception is an important part in shaping our reality. It plays a very important part in shaping how we see the world. And the reality is, if we see people dressed like this, there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction, if you will. And my intent in putting this up here isn't to give anyone a bad name. It's not to say that if you use pesticides that you are, you know, it's not to make people feel bad about that. In fact, according to the EPA, 92% of U.S. households use pesticides. And that's because the reality is we simply don't even realize a lot of the products that are around our home are actually pesticides. If some of us go to our cabinets, under our sinks perhaps, or in our laundry room, we'll see things like bleach, which features an EPA registration number on it. That means it's actually a registered pesticide. We'll see different types of cleaners with an EPA registration number on it, meaning that they're actually a registered pesticide. They're formulated to address a pest situation. Many of them are microbial pesticides, meaning that they're formulated to address bacteria and things that we want to address in the name of keeping an area clean, so to speak. And of course, chlorine. Chlorine is another very common product that people use around the home, for example, in our pools, and that also features an EPA registration number. And again, that would be a registered pesticide. So again, my point in putting this up here, and I do want to just make this statement, it's not to make anyone from a particular industry, like the chemical industry, you know, look bad, but it's to really talk about the fact that I believe that perception really does shape our reality. So if we do see people walking around with certain protective equipment on, I think that there is a knee-jerk reaction, perhaps for the better, perhaps not, but there is a reaction to this. Now, I just have a couple of statistics up here. Greater than 75% of consumers are very concerned about the use of pesticides. And according to a 1991 study by Oklahoma State University, it revealed that greater than 70% of consumers feel that there is some degree of hazard or a great degree of hazard associated with the use of pesticides. And as I said before, my point in putting these statistics up here, it's not to get quote-unquote caught up in the details, so to speak. It's simply to make a point, and that is that people are concerned about the use of pesticides. I feel that, that there's widespread concern relating to human and environmental health, and to get a little bit more specific about that, people are concerned about the use of pesticides and cancer rates, the use of pesticides relative to groundwater contamination, and the use of pesticides relative to the effects on non-target organisms. So I think that that's important to talk about, and it's important to simply to debate, if you will. So I feel that in terms of the future of pest management, I feel that there's going to be an increased emphasis on preventing pest populations. And I've talked quite extensively about this today. I feel that, you know, for example, the example that we like to use is if you have a hemlock tree in your yard, an eastern hemlock, probably one of my favorite conifers, if you simply turn over the foliage, you're probably going to see white cottony masses underneath the needles. And that, of course, is hemlock woolly adelgid, and many of us are familiar with that, unfortunately all too familiar with that. There's also a number of other insect pests, such as hemlock scale, that you might see on the undersides of your leaves. Well, again, if someone's thinking about planting a conifer in a part of their yard, and they asked us what our opinion would be relative to that, well, one of the things that that I might say might be, well, if you're concerned about these types of insects that I just mentioned, perhaps you simply don't want to go with an eastern hemlock. Perhaps you want to try a different type of conifer. So that's important relative to preventing pest populations. Another example that I like to use is kind of our classic, our white birch, if you will. White birch are commonly planted for their beautiful white ornamental bark, and the thing with white birch, however, is that white birch is really a much more northern tree. It's found, in fact, all the way up into the tree line in northern Canada, and will actually get quite large in size. However, down here in Westchester County, this particular tree is often small. It often struggles through the hot summers, and it becomes especially susceptible to insects like birch leaf miner. Now, you might say, how do I know I have birch leaf miner, or how do I know what birch leaf miner is? Birch leaf miner simply makes white birch look like a brown paper bag, if you will, by the end of the summer. It's a small insect that actually mines, feeds in between the two surfaces of the leaf, and of course can turn the leaf brown eventually by the end of the growing season. So that's one important insect pest to be aware of. And the other is the bronze birch borer. And again, someone might say, well, how do I know I have bronze birch borer? Well, bronze birch borer actually, it's a borer, so it actually causes exit wounds in the stem of the tree, and whenever it actually leaves the tree, you can sometimes see a coppery type of residue bleeding down the side of the tree. So that's another example of bronze birch borer. And bronze birch borer, of course, can be lethal to white birch, and birch leaf miner, of course, can be a very important stress factor. If those leaves can't photosynthesize, then it becomes very difficult for that tree to maintain health. And of course, decline can occur. So that's just two very quick examples, and if someone wants to plant something like a white birch, perhaps they could use something like one of the river birches, such as heritage river birch, which I realize the bark isn't quite as white as white birch. However, it does have many ornamental properties associated with it, and it is a very pest-free tree. So I think those two examples help to solidify what I mean relative to preventing pest populations. I think that we're going to see a lot more emphasis on baiting and trapping and other non-chemical methods of addressing pest populations in the future. You might remember that earlier slide I showed you when we were talking about what is a pest. There was an example of a bait that was being used for carpenter ants. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Some of even the old-fashioned spring traps, for example, or even the have-a-heart traps for rodents, such as mice and rats and things like that. I think that there's going to be a lot more of an emphasis on that. I think in my next point, innovation, there's going to be a lot more emphasis on using different things that we might commonly find around the house. And this example right here that I have in this picture is an example of simply a vacuum cleaner. And what's going on right here is simply that houseflies are being vacuumed out of the windows of this house. So this is a perfect example of what I mean in terms of innovation, a non-chemical method of addressing a pest population. And I think, again, there's going to be an increased emphasis on doing this sort of thing in the future. I think there's going to be an increased emphasis on monitoring, on encouraging people to get out and take a look at their properties and take a look at certain situations. If they have a pest problem in a given site that they're more concerned with than in other sites, I think that is definitely going to be an important factor. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, least toxic pesticides. And I think the reality of the situation is, I think to eliminate all chemicals altogether, while I think is desired by many people, is not going to be entirely realistic depending on the specific situation, the specific environment and the pest problem. So I think there's going to be an increased emphasis on the development and the utilization of least toxic pesticides. We have, of course, some examples such as using some of the vinegar-based products for weed control, such as Burnout or Nature's Glory. There are a number of different ones that are available. And again, these have kind of come on the market, so to speak, in the not-so-distant past in an attempt to address some of these concerns that I talked about today. So I think that that's going to be an important trend in the pest management field. Now, I do want to just leave you with a couple of websites that you can take a look at. There is a plethora of information on the World Wide Web now relative to integrated pest management and pest management around the home and garden, so to speak. This is just an example of a couple of different sites. People can go to the gardening website at Cornell University, www.gardening.cornell.edu. There's a lot of different great websites from different local universities. I think of University of Connecticut or Rutgers University or whatever your land-grant university would be. I think that taking a look at some of the information that they have to offer is a good idea. A lot of that information, or really all of that information, comes from the research that's either going on at that institution or at other land-grant institutions. And I think that's important because what you're getting is you're getting unbiased information from individuals that really don't have a particular product or a particular strategy that they want people to adapt. So I think that using a lot of those land-grant university resources is important. And of course, I can't end the talk without talking about taking a look at your local cooperative extension office. This is just the website here for the Cornell Cooperative Extension Office in Westchester County. So of course you can get in touch with us in the horticulture program area. Our information would be available here on this website in terms of our phone numbers. And if you live in a nearby county such as Putnam or Rockland, then the website is very similar. It's cce.cornell.edu, and of course then after the / would be your county. So if you're in Putnam County, it would be /Putnam, or Rockland County /Rockland. And I think that encouraging it's a resource that's available to you. So I do want to encourage you to avail yourself of your local cooperative extension offices. Now again, as I said before at the beginning, there's a plethora of information. If you go to any type of website, a search engine, and type in integrated pest management or pest management, there's going to be a lot of different information coming up. But relying a lot on these different university sites, I think, is important, as I said, for the research that goes on there and the unbiased information that you're going to get. So that really concludes my talk today, and it's been great to be here. I hope that we've had a chance to kind of unpack the term integrated pest management and what we talk about relative to integrated pest management. I think it does have kind of a neat past. Obviously, we have been managing pests for about as long as we've been trying to grow our own food, for thousands of years, and yet today, even with all of our advancements and all of the different things that we're able to do, we still contend with pests, and we'll do so in the future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Richard Sarrow, and I'm a senior at Pleasantville High School. The last summer, I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering under the guidance of Dr. Mary Billie. There, I worked on the fusion of myoblasts and the role that actin plays in it.
Hi, my name is Kayla Schulte, and I'm a first-year student in the Science Research Program. I will be studying links in sleep deprivation with adolescent behavioral patterns and scholastic performance under the mentorship of Nadav Traeger.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Nieto, and I'm a junior in the Science Research Program at Pleasantville High School. Last summer, I studied under the mentorship of Sachin Gupta at New York Medical College in Valhalla, studying the role of glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase and the pentose phosphate shunt in cardiovascular disease. Next summer, I hope to pursue similar research regarding NADPH oxidase and superoxide production in cardiovascular disease.
Hi, my name is Vivek Badi. I'm a third-year student at the Science Research Program. The last 2 years, I worked at Nathan Klein Institute for Psychiatric Research under Dr. Efrat Levy, and I've been studying cystatin C levels in transgenic mice brain, kidney, and serum.
Hi, my name is Seth Ashton, and I'm a second-year science research student. I'm studying at the Mianus River Gorge Preserve in Bedford, New York, under the mentorship of Mark Weckel, the preserve manager there. I'm studying the effect that Japanese snowgrass, an invasive species, has on the amphibian communities of that area. I'm looking forward to continuing my research this summer.
Hello, my name is Oscar Perez. I'm a senior in the Science Research Program, and last year I worked under the mentorship of Dr. Mansour Ahmad and Dr. Michael Walling in the New York Medical College. And the title of my research is The Effects of the Induction of Hemoxygenase 1 During Hypoxic Pulmonary Vasoconstriction.
Hi, my name is Greg Brown. I'm a second-year student in the Science Research Program. Last summer I did work at IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in Hawthorne under the mentorship of Ruud Bol. This summer I'll continue my research in the field of cancer biometrics.
Hello, my name is Garrett Berard. I am a sophomore at Pleasantville High School, and I'm interested in freshwater microbes of water supplies in Westchester, and I am finalizing my summer plans.
Hello, my name is Zach McKeister. I'm a senior at Pleasantville High School. I did my lab work at Albert Einstein College of Medicine under the mentorship of Dr. Nir Barzilov. The title of my research was Effects of Insulin Resistance on FOXO2 Levels in the Cytoplasm and Nucleus of Rat Liver Cells.
Hi, my name is Natasha Pamalova. This summer I will be studying the box turtle population at Rockefeller State Park Preserve under the mentorship of Mr. Mark Rogers.
Hi, my name is Jay Tolchin. I'm a sophomore at Pleasantville High School, and this summer I'll be studying the immune response in endothelial cells at Yale University under the mentorship of Dr. Paul Clark.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Chia, and I'm currently a sophomore in the Science Research Program. This summer, I plan on working at Regeneron's Research Institute under the Director of Microarray, Dr. Calvin Lin.
Hi, my name is Preeti Willman. I'm a junior, and this is my second year in the Science Research Program. This past summer, I spent at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatories of Columbia Universities in the Palisades of New York, where I studied the various factors that could affect carbon movement on a localized basis, things that could, on a greater scale, affect such factors as global warming. This summer, I will be returning and working under my mentor, Mr. Wayne McGillis.
Hi, my name is Victor Band. I'm a senior at Pleasantville High School, and I conducted my research at Albert Einstein College of Medicine under the mentorship of Dr. Luciano Rossetti. The title of my research was Central Amino Acids Reduce Liver Triglyceride Production.
Hi, my name is Andrew Tom, and I am a sophomore and a first-year student in the Science Research Program. And I am going to do my research over the summer with Dr. James D. Lewis at Fordham University at the Calder Lab.